The events you're about to see are based on real accounts. To protect the identities of those involved, names and details have been changed. My name is Colton Westcott. I'm 33 years old and I live in Greenville, South Carolina. What I'm about to tell you happened in 2016, and to this day, I still can't quite understand what happened that night. I've never been one to believe in stories of clowns just appearing out of nowhere to scare people, but after what I saw, I can't say it was just hysteria. Every time I think about that day, I get a chill up my spine and try to convince myself it was just in my head, but it felt too real to be just imagination. I lived in a rented house on the outskirts of town, on a quiet street, a little farther from the center. The neighborhood was peaceful, full of families with kids and people who had known each other for years. It was the type of place where no one locked their door until dark. The house had a big backyard that led directly to a dense wooded area. At night, that place was pitch black, and I avoided getting too close to the fence because it always felt like something was waiting there, just out of sight. It was a Tuesday in September, and I had gotten home from work later than usual. My son, Ben, who was 8 years old, was watching TV in the living room while I was preparing dinner. My wife hadn't come home yet, so it was just me and him in the house. Everything seemed calm until I heard some noises coming from outside, like something being kicked around in the yard. At first I thought it was some raccoon or one of the loose dogs from the neighborhood. I opened the kitchen door and looked out at the lawn, but I didn't see anything. Just the silence and the trees swaying lightly in the wind. I went back inside and kept cooking, trying to shake off that strange feeling that something was off. That's when I heard Ben calling me from the living room, saying there was someone standing by the fence. My heart skipped a beat and I rushed to him. I pointed my phone's flashlight out the window and saw, at the edge of the light, a figure standing there. It was a clown. For a second, I thought it was some prank or a stupid kid trying to scare the neighborhood. But there was something wrong with how still the figure was, how it just stood there, staring directly at the living room window without moving. I told Ben to go to his room and locked the front door. Took a deep breath and tried calling the police, but while the phone was ringing, I heard a loud bang on the kitchen window, like someone had hit it hard. I rushed over there and once again saw another clown. This time it was closer, dressed in a filthy costume and wearing a mask with a bizarre expression, half smiling, half blank. It just stood there staring at me and I felt my stomach churn with fear. I sent Ben to lock himself in the bathroom and bolted the door. I stood still in the hallway, trying to think of what to do. The banging stopped suddenly, and everything went silent. I could only hear my own breathing and the TV in the living room, still on. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to gather the courage to look out the window again. When I finally worked up the nerve, I crouched down slowly and pulled back the curtain just a bit. There was no one on the porch. I went back to the kitchen and looked out into the yard. Empty. I grabbed my phone and managed to call the police. I explained everything that had happened, and they told me they were getting other calls about clowns roaming houses in the area. They told me to keep the doors locked and wait for the patrol. When the police arrived, the officers searched the yard and the wooded area, but they found nothing. No clues, no footprints, nothing to suggest someone had really been there. They said they'd increase patrols that night and that I should call if I saw anything strange again. After they left, I stayed up until morning, bat in hand, keeping watch over the house. Ben ended up falling asleep in the bathroom, and when the sun finally came up, it felt like everything had been a nightmare. In the following days, I heard about other similar reports from around the neighborhood, but no one ever identified who the clowns were or what they really wanted. Some people said it was just teenagers pulling pranks, while others thought it could be something worse, but nothing concrete was ever discovered. All I know is that after that night, I couldn't relax at night anymore. Any noise outside made me jump out of bed. It's been years since that incident, but I still remember every detail, every awful feeling of being watched. I don't know what those guys wanted, or if they were just pulling a prank, but something about the way they stood there, motionless and staring, still gives me the chills to this day. All I know is that I've never felt safe at home again after that. My name is Caleb Harper. I'm 33 years old, and I live in a small town called Pine Ridge, North Carolina. I never thought I'd be here writing this for a forum, but after what happened, I can't get it out of my head. What I'm about to tell you happened back in 2016, and even now, all these years later, I still get chills every time I think about it. I lived with my wife Emily in a simple but cozy house. We were just starting to settle into that area. Pine Ridge is a quiet place with more trees than people, and the town has a calm vibe that seemed like the perfect place to start a new life. We never imagined something so bizarre and terrifying could happen there, but it did. It all started on an autumn afternoon. It was a typical day, and we were at a friend's house, having coffee and chatting. That's when someone mentioned that something strange was happening across the country. There was a wave of sightings of creepy clowns in various states. What seemed like sensationalist newspaper stories quickly took a darker turn when someone showed a photo on their phone. A clown standing in the middle of an empty street with a cold and threatening expression. It wasn't that funny clown with a face that made kids laugh. No, this one had a fixed stare, almost like it was waiting for something, like it was lurking. I didn't know what to think until the situation came close to me. That night, when we came back home, Emily and I had this weird feeling, like the air was charged with something. The house was quiet, but the silence was heavy, almost palpable. While Emily was making dinner, I went to the living room window to check if everything was normal outside. There, across the street, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. In the middle of the street, standing still, was a clown. It wasn't some joke or a disguise. The clown was staring directly at me, with a white mask and a smile that didn't seem right. I felt cold all of a sudden, but I thought it could be some kind of prank. I went to the door to take a better look. I peeked through the crack in the front door's window, and it wasn't moving. Then Emily noticed my reaction. She came over and asked what was going on, but I didn't have to say anything. She saw it too. The clown didn't look real. It was like it was standing there, waiting, like it knew someone would see it. We didn't say anything for a few minutes. We just watched. Then the clown slowly turned and started walking towards our house. I felt a wave of panic that I couldn't control. I ran to the door, locking it quickly and turning off all the lights. Emily was in shock, not knowing what to do. I just knew I had to get our minds off of what we had seen. We didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't normal. The clown didn't show up again that night, but the feeling that something was wrong stayed. The fear grew, and we weren't the only ones going through it. In the following days, the reports of clowns in several cities kept growing. They were in multiple states, from Alaska to Texas, and the cases were similar. Creepy clowns with scary masks, showing up in isolated places or even busy urban areas, and nobody knew where they were coming from. That was when I decided to look for more information. I was desperate to understand what was going on. I did a search on the internet, checked local news, and even browsed discussion forums. I found some accounts of people who had seen these clowns, and the most terrifying thing was that they all described something similar. A fixed stare, a strange smile, and a feeling of being stalked that seemed inescapable. The worst part was that the authorities didn't know what to do. No one knew. What really freaked me out was when I read about something that happened in a neighboring state. A group of kids was playing in a park when they saw a clown watching them from a distance. They tried to call their parents, but when the adult went to check, the clown was simply gone. It wasn't just the disappearance that gave me chills, but the kids' description. They said that, for a moment, they felt like the clown was communicating with them, without words. And that his smile, it was like a warning. That made me even more uneasy, and the fear turned into full-blown panic. A month later, I started to notice something even stranger. We began hearing reports of people being approached by clowns on the streets. Some just ignored them, while others had much more disturbing encounters, where the clowns would get close, stare at them, and then walk away without saying anything. But the weirdest thing happened one night, while I was walking to the car. I saw a clown standing in the street near a lamppost. He was standing there just like the first time, but this time he didn't look directly at me. Instead, he looked at the car door and, as if mocking me, took a step toward me. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran back inside, locking everything up again. Emily was scared, but the worst was yet to come. The next morning, the clown was there again, across the street. But this time, he wasn't just standing there. He was moving his head in a strange way, like he was laughing. A laugh that didn't sound natural. I could barely breathe when I saw that. I never knew if it was some kind of sick prank or if something far more sinister was going on. After that event, the sightings of the clowns faded, but the fear didn't go away. The feeling that they were always nearby, watching, never left me. Even today, years later, the stories are still being told. And while many people think it was just a big coincidence or a series of pranks, I know what I experienced. I know what I saw. And the worst part is that, to this day, I still feel the presence of that clown, like it's watching me, waiting for the right moment to show up again. My name is Farah. I'm 32 years old and I live in Jacksonville, Florida. The story I'm about to tell happened about 3 years ago, but to this day, when I close my eyes, I can still see that scene clearly. I'm not sure where to start, but I feel like I need to share it, since many similar reports have been popping up lately. You might have heard of these sightings of strange clowns in deserted streets and forests. So, I'll tell you what happened to me one night like that. It was a Thursday, very late, around 2 a.m. I had just left work and was heading home, like I always do. I was never the type to be scared of walking around at night, especially in Jacksonville, which is a pretty quiet city. But that night, something felt off. I was driving down Route 202, a stretch that cuts through a more isolated area, when I started feeling a chill. I don't know if it was the cold wind or the feeling that someone was watching me, but my body started to tense up. Then I saw it in the corner of the rearview mirror, a figure. It wasn't a car, nor a normal person. It was strange. I stopped the car instinctively, and when I looked outside, there it was. A clown. I can't describe exactly how it looked, but imagine a tall figure wearing an old-fashioned clown costume, the kind you see in horror movies. It was standing in the middle of the road, staring straight at me, but there was no movement. It wasn't doing anything, just standing there, like it was watching me, waiting. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't prepared for something like this. When my heart started racing, I decided to get out of the car, thinking maybe it was some kind of prank. I shouted, asking if it needed help, but there was no answer. It just stood there with that painted smile on its face, expressionless, motionless. It was enough to make my mind race with paranoid thoughts. I looked around and realized there was no one else on the road. There were no passing cars, no lights from houses nearby, just silence and that grotesque figure. The feeling of being watched was unbearable. It felt like it was studying me, analyzing me. I thought about getting back in the car and driving away, but something stopped me. I didn't know if I should confront it or run. I looked at it again, and that's when I realized it wasn't in the middle of the road anymore. It was now by the tree on the side of the road, but it hadn't moved. It had just appeared there, like it had teleported. At that moment, I panicked. I rushed to the car, slammed the door shut, and started the engine. I was shaking. I couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror while I drove. The road seemed endless, and no matter how fast I went, the feeling that it was following me never went away. The headlights cut through the darkness, and for a second it felt like it was still out there, just waiting. I spent the rest of the night at home, trying not to think about it, but the fear wouldn't leave me alone. The next morning, I went back to the place where I saw the clown, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There were no signs of footprints or anything else that could indicate it had been there. No traces of its presence at all. It was like it had vanished into thin air. In the following days, I started hearing more reports from people who saw similar things. Clowns dressed in bizarre costumes, standing on deserted roads, watching people and disappearing without a trace. I didn't know what to think. Some people talked about theories that it was just people having fun, but to me, that was more than a joke. The worst part of it all was that, for weeks, the feeling that I was being followed didn't leave me. When I walked down empty streets at night, I felt like someone was watching me from a distance. I didn't see the clown anymore, but I knew it was there, somewhere, watching me. I still try to understand what happened that night. Maybe it was just a delirium caused by exhaustion, or maybe something more sinister was going on. I don't know, and that uncertainty eats at me. The feeling of helplessness, of being at the mercy of something you can't comprehend, is terrifying. Today, I avoid those areas at night. Not because I fear encountering the clown again, but because I know the feeling of being watched, of being vulnerable, will come back. And that feeling is far more terrifying than anything I could see. The scariest part of all is that, to this day, I haven't been able to find out anything about that clown. No other reports seem to match what I experienced. As if it were a solitary presence, one that only appears to a few people and then vanishes without leaving a trace. Maybe the most terrifying thing is that what I saw that night, I'll never fully understand. And that, in itself, is the true horror. My name is Jake Miller. I'm 34 years old. I live in Greenville, South Carolina, and I'm going to tell a story that happened to my younger sister and her friends about 3 years ago. To this day, I still can't understand what really happened, but I know that, since that day, I've never looked at the town the same way again. It was a Saturday morning, and the weather was warm for a late September day. I was at home when my sister Emily, who was 11 years old at the time, came running through the front door, pale as a ghost. She looked terrified but wasn't saying anything, just shaking. I asked what had happened, but she couldn't answer right away. She just kept staring out the window, as if she saw something outside. I started to get worried and tried to calm her down, telling her it was probably just her imagination, but something in her expression told me it wasn't. She then told me about the clowns. Emily and her friends had gone to play at the park that morning, like they always did. The park was secluded, surrounded by some tall trees, making it the perfect place for the kids to play without being watched. They were having fun when, in one of the farthest trees, they saw 2 clowns. At least, that's what they looked like at first. One of them wore a colourful wig, with makeup that seemed overdone, and the other, a bit shorter, was wearing a striped shirt and loose pants. But what really caught the kids' attention was the fact that they were offering money. They were standing in a clearing in the trees, and when they saw the kids approaching, they waved and smiled. The clowns said they could give a large sum of money if they came closer. Emily told me that her friends were curious, but she had a weird feeling right from the start. She tried to pull one of the boys aside, suggesting they leave, but he was already walking toward the clowns, staring at them like he was hypnotized. Fear started to take over her, and she quickly pulled the group away. When they tried to leave, the other clown, the one in the striped shirt, made a gesture for them to stay. Emily and the others froze for a moment, and that's when she heard her friend whispering that they were just trying to help, that the money was for fun. That was enough for Emily to realize something was very wrong. They managed to walk away quickly, but not without noticing that the clowns were watching them from a distance, with wide smiles and eyes far too big to be natural. When Emily got home, she couldn't stop looking over her shoulder. She kept asking if anyone was watching, like the clowns were somehow following her. I knew she was terrified, but something inside me didn't fully believe her story. Until the next day, when more reports started to surface in town. Parents began talking to each other about kids seeing clowns in wooded areas offering money. One neighbor, Mr. Johnson, said he saw a child running home, crying, saying a clown wanted to give them something, but they didn't know what it was. The police were called to investigate, and what they discovered left everyone in Greenville even more scared. Several other kids had seen the clowns, and the stories were consistent. The clowns always seemed to be in isolated areas, offering money in exchange for something the kids couldn't understand. But the strangest thing was that after a few days, no one heard anything more about it. The police didn't find anything, the investigation stopped, and the reports mysteriously disappeared. For a while, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just something the kids made up, but something inside me told me what happened to Emily wasn't simple. I never saw the clowns, but the way my sister described them. There was something off, something wrong about their smiles, about the way they tried to lure the kids in. It was like they weren't just trying to give out money, but something darker, like they were after something. Somehow, everyone involved in that incident was never quite the same. The kids didn't want to play at the park anymore. The parents stayed away from public spaces even more, and slowly, fear began to take over. Even I, years later, still catch myself thinking about the clowns. Where were they? What did they really want? Why did they disappear so quickly? And the strangest thing of all, why hasn't anyone mentioned it again after a while? I don't know what that was, but I know I'll never look at the forests and clearings the same way again. Something's out there waiting, and it's not just about money. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like to support the community. And if you're not subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. See you next time.